Welcome to DBT and the Dharma, episode 6.
Tell us, what is on the docket today in DBT terms?
We are going to talk about the effectively skill. So, the effectively skill is about doing what's effective in the situation that you're in.
Okay.
So, here's what can happen, right? We're in a situation and we get caught up in being right.
Oh, all the time.
Tell me about that.
I don't know. Who hasn't had a moment when they're like, oh no, I'm totally right? This actually happened the other day. I was having I played a show for Nashville Pride, and my wife told me that I told her that load-in was at, let's say, like 1:30. Load-in was at 12:15.
Load-in. That's when you
like
load
take
the
gear
stuff.
to the place.
I was like, who's loading?
And she like swore up and down I told her 1:30 as load-in time. And I was like, I absolutely would have never said that because load-in isn't at 12:15. And it actually caused a bit of conflict because I was like, no, there's no way I would have told you that. We go on at 1. So it was this whole thing. So tell me, how could I have been what is the effectively skill in that situation?
Yeah, so the problem with that is you're going to try and prove that you're right, and it's never going to work. Or maybe it could, but it's like the conflict is unnecessary. What do you think would have been effective in that situation? Like to reduce the conflict and move on. So you're not having, you're under the pressure of loading in your stage equipment, and that's what you really want to be getting done, isn't it? Like you don't really want to be having an argument with your wife about when and what you said and all that, right?
Correct.
So what could you do? Okay, so let's role play.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. So
you always do this to me. You always make me role play. It's so fun. Let's
I do.
Go. Yes.
I always do this. Oh, that's true. When we were practicing
all the time.
I love doing role plays. So I'm Grace. You told me the load-in was at 1:30.
Am I trying to be effective?
Yes. So I get to be bitchy because people are going to be bitchy. Grace is lovely, but she used to be like, you told me it was 1:30.
Okay. And if I'm being effective, I would say, oh my gosh, I must have made a mistake. And it's actually at this time. So let's kick it into higher gear and get out of here.
Interesting. I actually don't think that you have to, just because you're not standing on being right, doesn't mean that you have to pretend that you were wrong.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so instead maybe saying something more along the lines of like, oh man, miscommunication. That blows. Let's keep rolling. Let's keep trucking.
Exactly.
Well, I guess we had a miscommunication.
Yeah, because what you're really there to do is load in, right? And you're not, like, it's not effective to get into an argument about, did you say this or did I say that? And I loved how you handled that when you just say, oh, miscommunication. Do you know? And the nice thing is, there are people who will fight you on, no, it's not miscommunication. You didn't say that. But hopefully, because Grace is actually a really lovely person, she'll be like, okay, I'll accept that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because then she's also being effective.
Gotcha.
Because again, what are you there for? That's what the effectively skill is about, is keeping your goals in mind, right? So plenty of people have lost relationships, lost jobs, lost, how many of you have lost things because you were so determined to prove that you were right?
Yeah. Okay. So is this like mainly in interpersonal stuff, or is there a way you can practice the effectively skill with yourself? Like how does it work?
Gosh, yeah. So I just want to get, because I do think a lot of times it comes up when you're in interpersonal situations. And I think it's really important to remember that this is not about surrendering to injustice.
Okay.
Because that's where people get tricky with it. They're like, well, but what if I am right and the other person is wrong and it's not fair? There is a bottom line thing about the effectively skill, that it is true that life is often not fair. But you're not so much fighting the unfairness as you are trying to figure out what is going to be the most effective way to get from this unfair place where I am right now to the place where I want to be, or as close as possible to where I want to be.
Because of values and things of that nature. Okay. Okay.
So there's the other thing too, though, is what Marsha Linehan, who created DBT, what she says is that the effectively skill is about doing what's necessary in the situation that you are in, not the situation you wish you were in. So, right.
That's so interesting. I was listening to a Dharma talk today that was all about like the Buddha being a teacher of action. And it was kind of cool because it was Gil Fronsdale. I don't know if you've heard. Gil Fronsdale is a great teacher, but he said something about how the Buddha is less concerned with who you are and more concerned with what you do, and how what you do informs who you are. Like all those actions. So it's like not necessarily what thoughts show up or what things show up. That's not who I am, but it's like the way I choose to react to them, and the way I choose whether or not I want to be effective or if I want to kind of roll around in that feeling a little more. Is that kind of
right? Well, like in the feeling of righteousness.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we can all get righteous. I guess, you know what? I know I want to hear about the Dharma stuff, but I feel like the perfect moment right now is for me to tell that story that I wanted to tell.
Yes, I love that story. Tell that story. Story time.
I'm going to tell a story, and then we can kind of deconstruct how it relates to the Dharma. This to me is a great example of using the effectively skill. And we're going to talk, it's going to get political.
Ooh.
But you know what? I think that this is a really, really important time for people to know how to use the effectively skill.
Preach.
When you are talking to people who have different viewpoints than you have. And so here's the story. I had a friend who was in the hospital, and I was in the waiting room while my friend was having this procedure, and his dad was in the waiting room with me, and his dad is very different than me politically. He's very conservative, Southern man.
Never run into that, ever.
We run into that all the time in Tennessee, right? And so the TV's on, and this woman is on the news, and she's talking about how her 6-year-old has been traumatized by the active shooter drills at their school. And so my friend's dad says, "Oh, those snowflakes." He's like, they need to get over themselves because they need to have those shooter drills to keep the kids safe. And there was like this moment where I'm like, what am I going to do? Do I just like ignore it? Do I get on my high horse, which is probably not going to be effective? Or do I try to figure out how to effectively communicate with him about this topic? And so, and I feel like this is something that we can all try to be thinking about when we have these conversations, is I was like, okay, what is he really saying? He's saying, bottom line, he's saying he wants kids to be safe. We may have very different ideas about how to get there. Does that make sense? But for him, he wants kids to be safe. And he believes we have to have the active shooter drills to keep kids safe. And I'm not saying that that's not true. But what I did say to him was, I was like, you know, I think you're right. I mean, look for the thing that I can agree with, right? I think we do need to have drills. But I said, because then he said, well, when I was in elementary school, we had fire drills, and I wasn't traumatized by that. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, here's my in.
Yeah.
Here's my in to have an effective conversation, to not necessarily change his mind, but help him see a little bit of a different perspective and have an actual conversation. And I was like, so if your fire drills were like my fire drills, the alarm would go off, and we would all, get up and get in line, and we'd be like, yeah, we're going to hang out outside, right? And then we'd like walk outside, and then we'd have our time outside, and then we'd come back in. And it was very undramatic. And my understanding about a lot of schools that do these active shooter drills is that it's pretty intense simulation.
Have you ever done one?
No, you're young enough that you have,
yeah,
aren't you?
Yeah.
Maddie, what is it like?
So I remember I did them in high school, and it was like they would send people in. Like they would have like, it was almost like paintball. It was like really weird. Like they had people dressed up who would like run through the hallways, and they would like come over the loudspeaker and say like, we had like code words or something that we would know if we heard these words.
It sounds terrifying.
And then they would give us a bunch of objects,
Mm-hmm.
and when they would come into the classroom, we'd have to throw things at them to try it, because it's like they teach you just like to do. It was scary. It was scary.
So
sure.
These people come through and they've got these fake
oh
guns.
yeah, fake guns, masks,
and they're
whole 9 yards.
So they're shooting at you, but with paintball.
No,
kind of
but
things?
It just felt like I was in paintball.
Oh, okay.
No, but
like, they're
yeah.
simulating like what it would be like.
Yeah,
if
like
someone
pounding
was actually,
on the doors and like that sort of stuff.
Like, so it's very aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Yeah.
Is that it's very much like a simulation of what it would be like if someone was actually attacking your school.
Mm-hmm.
And that does sound really scary. Was it scary for you?
Yeah, compared to a fire drill.
Okay. Well, and this is what I said to him, is I was like, I'm kind of thinking that like what this is like is imagine if when we were in school, a fire drill meant they flooded the halls with smoke, and the firefighters were there in their big heavy fire suits, which can be very scary. They're and we had to get our shirts covered wet and cover our mouths and go running out of the building because and he was like, oh. He's like, that would have been traumatizing.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, it's that. Right. And so to me, what I'm illustrating as the effectively skill is to be effective in a conversation with someone who disagrees with you. You got to look for the common ground. Mm-hmm. And the common ground is about keeping kids safe. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't even about persuading him anything about gun control.
Yeah. But
just to help him understand a little bit about this perspective that he saw on the news that he was dismissing, mm-hmm. that I connect with, relate to, and just helping move the needle a little bit to help him understand what that perspective might be.
That's really interesting. So from the Dharma side of things,
mm-hmm.
I get curious. I'm like, how do you know when you need to use the effectively skill? Because I'm really interested in that space between, okay, that man just said snowflake, and the calm conversation. Mm-hmm. That moment.
I think there's a lot of skills in there, honestly, because you feel that hit, right? Especially when someone's saying something a little insulting, mm-hmm. And he knows I'm super liberal with my cape, and so there's that little bit of that that uncle at Thanksgiving that digs. And so I think this is that mindfulness thing, right? You got to feel the bristle. And then you got to notice emotion mind, mm-hmm. which these are things we've talked about in the previous episodes. You notice that emotion mind, and then you can use the stop skill mm-hmm. to kind of check in with your action urge. Mm-hmm. And then this is the skill where you're like, what do I actually want here? Mm. Yeah. Do I want to alienate this person? That's probably not effective. I mean, you could do it. It's a choice, mm-hmm. right? But, this person is in my life. Mm-hmm. And I don't really want to have a lot of tension and conflict with them.
Totally. So you're assessing your values mm-hmm. and acting accordingly.
But I also felt like I've been in this space of feeling like I've often been extremely passive in those situations.
Oh, yeah.
Where I'm just like, okay, just ignore it, just whatever, they're just whatever. But sometimes I feel like it's really important to drop into okay, how can we actually effectively communicate mm-hmm. about this and have a real conversation?
Yeah, and it reminds me a lot of, there's this thing in Buddhism called the three flames, mm-hmm. right? It almost reminds me of okay, I need to, in order to ask myself, how can I effectively communicate? I need to kind of cool down for a second. I need to give myself a moment. Mm-hmm. And so
So how do I cool down?
Right. And so this is the whole thing of it's interesting because you need that space to be able to be effective, but it's
but you're boiling.
You're boiling, right? And so so the boiling thing is interesting.
I knew that Maddie was going to talk about the boiling pot of water. I love this because I actually used this to help me the other night. Cool. When I was my pot of water was boiling on all three flames, mm-hmm. and it was not comfortable and it was not pleasant, and I was very upset. And then I thought about what Maddie is about to tell you about.
Yeah, so there's the three flames, right? So the one that I'm hearing you talk about in a lot of the examples is hatred. So the Buddha, sometimes they're called the three poisons of the mind. I like to talk about them as the three flames because that's one of the first, it's called the fire sermon. It's like one of the first teachings of the Buddha. It's really cool.
The
and
fire
he
sermon.
talks about the flames of greed, hatred, and delusion.
Wait, slow down.
Yeah, well, he talks about the flames of greed, hatred, and delusion.
So the three flames.
Three flames are greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed being, I don't really love that word greed because sometimes it's like associated with money or this and that, but I kind of label it, even I boil it down, no pun intended, I boil it down more to wanting. Right? There's a lot of wanting. Then you have hatred, which comes up a lot, and even when you were in that situation.
And does hatred have to be like, I hate you, or
No.
could it be like resentment?
I call it aversion sometimes.
Okay,
right?
love
Or
that
sometimes
word.
I'll boil it down to not wanting. Super simple. Greed, wanting, hatred, not wanting.
Like not wanting the thing, like I hate the thing. Like when I hate something, I don't want it to exist.
Exactly.
I don't want it to be happening.
Yeah, and again, like, there's so much weird stuff with translation, which is why I love not wanting, because it can be as simple as I'm not wanting to sit and listen to this man call me a snowflake anymore. Right? Or I'm not wanting to have this conversation. So sometimes you will be passive just because you're like, I don't want to go there. And then there's also the flame of delusion, which is really interesting because that one I boil down to not here. So very often our mind will boil over with so many things, right?
So let me just pause on the delusion because I feel like that can be super triggering to be. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Totally.
Oh, you're delusional. Because I actually, once you told me about this, I tried talking about it with a client, and I could see, I was like, oh, this is not going well.
Yeah.
I had to be really clear that I didn't mean that they were delusional.
No, honestly, again, this is like a translation thing. Delusional is a way you can say it. Some people say ignorance, but it really, to me, boils down to not here. Like, I am somewhere far away from here. My mind, sometimes you could even say just like not present. Not with reality.
Right. I feel like it's really important to deconstruct that because like those labels sound very judgmental.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
And like, you know, if you're like, well, you're just sitting in the flame of ignorance or delusion, that can feel very invalidating.
Totally.
But if it's like, no, what it is what we mean by that delusion is not here.
Not here.
You are leaving the building.
Yes.
Like, is it like kind of like when your mind leaves the building?
When your mind leaves the building, or like a good example. What's a good example of delusion? I tell this story sometimes, but I talk about like a good example of this for me is I will look at houses here in Nashville for my wife and I, and the sticker shock for me is insane. And so I have this thought, well, what if we move back to Cleveland, Ohio? Because houses are so much cheaper there. And so I'm on Zillow, go back to Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm searching for these. And I'm like, yeah, these houses are cheap. We could totally move there. That's going to be awesome. You know, but Grace has never driven in the snow. And I wonder how she would do with that. And like, what if she got in an accident? And like, does she have 4-wheel drive? So I've gone from looking at houses to killing my wife in like 5 seconds because my mind just will run. It's that like spiraling thing of like, there's not necessarily wanting, there's not necessarily not wanting wrapped up in that. Or maybe there's both, just in smaller amounts. It's more, the thing that is causing me the most suffering is the own imagination that I have. Or the own like,
so the stories that you're making
stories
up.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so okay, we're just like, here we are, right? And you are a pot of boiling water.
Sure.
Like, this is how you told it to me.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, this makes sense.
Okay, so because this is how I thought of it the other night. I'm a pot of boiling water, and I'm boiling over because I've got this not wanting flame. There's a flame of not wanting. I do not want this to be the way things are. I've got a flame of wanting. I want things to be like this. And but it does feel like there's agreed. There's like an intensity to it, yes. Right? And there is a like, I kind of do hate the situation.
Totally.
And then the delusion then would be the stories that I'm churning in my mind about what's going to happen, and how is it going to turn out badly.
How could you have prevented it?
How could I, so to go backwards also?
Anywhere. Yeah. Or it could be like, okay, I'm going to check out. I'm going to just think about, I'm going to go scroll and look at kangaroos that have big muscles on the internet. Like, it literally, you could be
so
whatever.
Okay, let's just do this with politics.
Oh, right? Goodness, okay.
because the election is coming, oof. And I feel like we all need tools for dealing with that, right? So, okay, dude says snowflake, calls my people snowflakes. I'm a freaking therapist, and he's like, those kids aren't traumatized, whatever. So there's that. Okay, now my pot of water. Hello, beans. Now my pot of water, the flames have just gotten turned on, right? And there's the like the story. I'm thinking like the stories. The delusion is the part that's the most intense. Of like children are dying, right? And there's like there's all of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even necessarily call that delusion because it's true.
Okay, it's true, but there's some, I guess when I want to, right, it's true. So it's not wanting, right?
Yeah, so
it's hatred of this situation.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. I think the delusion piece would be more like, this guy's an asshole, or this no one understands, or like the boomer generation sucks, or even going
I'm Gen X, just for the record.
Or like going the opposite direction and saying like, man, like if I could just like going into fantasies and going into what could have been or what you could have done different. It's basically just really just being not in the moment, not here, not here. Because again, it's about a relationship to things. So when the hatred arises, when someone calls me a snowflake, actually, we just had Pride here, and of course, outside the gates of Pride, there's people protesting. There's people, saying what they feel like they need to say, and it's because of this practice and knowing about these three flames, and knowing about the connection to these and enlightenment. And that's a weird word too to start throwing around, but maybe I'll just say freedom, liberation, right? That's the whole reason we're here.
So when I think liberation would be taking that pot of water off the flames.
Exactly. And the Pali Sanskrit word for enlightenment, liberation, freedom, essentially the whole thing we're doing with meditating, trying to get to, is nibbana. Nibbana, which actually comes from a cooking term, which is to take a boiling pot of water off of its heat source, which is where we're getting this boiling pot of water thing from. So it's like, and this pot of water is just fueled by these flames of greed, hatred, and delusion. Sometimes a mix of all three, which it sounds like you've experienced all of those kind of arising in and out at the same time. The thing with them is noticing when they are present is the way to take them off.
I felt that, like, because I was feeling that churning, and I was like, it was really helpful, that boiling water metaphor, because I could feel myself boiling. Have you ever felt yourself boiling, right, internally? And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm on these flames, right? I'm going to remove the pot of water from the flames, which frees me from that churning.
Yep.
Right? From the boiling. So, but I am very curious to hear how you're coming into the gates of Pride. There's protesters, and you're performing. And how did you handle that? Tell me about how these three, knowing this knowledge, how did this knowledge help you?
How did this knowledge help me? So you, first of all, going in and noticing the fact that it's unpleasant, right? That I have a reaction to it, right? So and that gets my waters kind of bubbling, right? And so there's this
where's fear fit into that, into those flames?
I think it could be a healthy mix of any of them, right? Like,
I guess fear could be not wanting this to be this way.
Not wanting this to be this way, or like wanting safety, or there's plenty of things, but a big piece of it for me is like noticing, okay, this like hits my heart in a way that's unpleasant. Then you can start to ask, okay, aversion, like I don't want them to be here. And then I start to notice that, like, they shouldn't be here. Who do they think they are? I'm seeing people argue with them, and I'm like, that's not going to help any. So I start spinning into story about it, not here. And so as I'm walking and I'm noticing all this going on in my mind, I can simply note not wanting. And I can simply note not here. Because almost like the effectively skill, my goal is not to be wrapped up with this man who's trying to tell me that I'm living in sin. My goal is to hold my wife's hand and go into an amazing festival and play an amazing show and have a good time, right? So the most effective thing for me in that moment, based on my goals, was to notice my hatred arising and say, ooh, hey, hatred, how's it going? Okay.
Hey, buddy.
It's almost like that thing of like, when you can just welcome something in to the experience, you're able to, it subsides.
Right, that comes back to the Maras, right? The story of the Buddha sitting there trying to be liberated, to be liberated from those flames, right? And these Maras, they're like the demons or whatever.
So Mara is actually is one person being. Mara is like the devil in Buddhist terms, but the cool thing about it is that he's not vilified. He's like, the Buddha talks about sitting and having tea with Mara, like welcoming him in but not letting him rearrange the furniture. Like that's what this whole thing is. So he says, I see you, Mara. And that's the thing. So it's almost the same exact thing when hatred arises, and we can say, oh, I see you, hatred. I see you. Not in a like, I see you, back up. It's not a like big, you don't fight hatred with hatred. You see the hatred and you gain a little bit of space, and it allows the flame, it allows you to pick the water up off the flame. The same thing with greed. When I notice wanting for success or for anything, like a money, car, to not have like a headache sometimes, you know? When I can notice that there's such a deep wanting for something, and I can say, okay, hey, wanting, what's up?
So how is this different? Like in the previous episode, we talked about craving. How is this, you know what I mean? How is the craving versus wholesome desire different?
It feels like we're kind of getting...
You're right. We're getting into the weeds.
Areas.
Okay. You know what? Let's go back and cut the Mara.
Yeah.
Let's cut the Mara.
So we'll cut from Mara.
And then pick up maybe with like what is my goal going into the Pride Festival? It's to do this thing.
Yeah.
And it ties it back to the effective skill.
Cut back to when Maddie was talking about what is the goal for going into Pride. Let's cut back to there and let's not go into the weeds about the Mara. I think we talked about that before anyway. Anyway.
But then you can tie it back to the effective skill, combine the two, and then maybe talk about what to do with it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, what are we doing?
Okay, I got you.
Thanks. All
right, so when you keep your eye on your goal, like, why am I here at this event? I'm not actually here to try and argue with someone or convert someone to my way of thinking. That's not why I'm here today. So, I mean, that could be something you decide.
Oh, totally.
And then you figure out how to be effective at that. But your goal is to have a good day, right? And have a great performance. And so this is where I think this is a beautiful blend of like, how do we do the effectively skill? Here's another way to get yourself there, right? Is to notice those three flames.
Yep.
And to just literally, and I think Marsha Linehan would love this because she loves metaphors, to literally take your yourself as the boiling pot of water off the flames.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you the space. We're always talking about that, right? Having the space to make a wise decision.
Yeah.
Right? To make a wise decision about what's going to take you in the direction
Mm-hmm.
of the life that you want, of the day that you want, of how you want to manage the conversation or whatever it is that you're doing. So that's the tie-in, I think, right?
Absolutely.
That you're liberating yourself from having to be right.
Yeah.
You're liberating yourself. And again, it doesn't mean that you're not right.
Mm-hmm.
And it also doesn't mean that you have to just turn a blind eye to injustice.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes using the effectively skill is about the long arc of justice.
Yeah.
Right? Of playing the long game for getting what you want and for justice.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not about passivity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And you have a little thing that you like to say about that.
Do no harm, take no shit.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, do no harm, take no shit. That's like the whole thing here. And we're going to get into an episode about equanimity, which is, we'll go more in depth on how to really like, okay, what are the nuances of that?
Mm-hmm.
But for now, I think it's so good to just start to notice when hatred is present. Notice when greed is present. Because most of the time, those things will be the fuel to our reactivity.
And that's the fuel that will take us out of being effective.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And it'll make us go like, no, I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I know I said it before, but I just want to really stress, it's not that you have to say, oh, I'm mistaken, I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just that you're looking for what's the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
What's the way forward? And sometimes the way forward is conflict. Sometimes being effective is about facing conflict and, setting that limit or whatever. But we're just trying to be open to really thinking through, how do I get there?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yes, I feel like that's such a good tie-in. I'm wondering, like, how can folks practice this today is really like the big thing. And what we've always wanted to do with this podcast is just ask, how can we provide some actionable takeaways, some actionable tips for practicing these things in real life? So I'm almost like, how do we do something where we can kind of tie it together? It's almost like maybe start to notice if greed, hatred, or delusion, or wanting, not here is present. Because I don't want to get too much into this, but it is really interesting. There is a text in Buddhism that talks about how these are also like personality types. Like very often, if you have hatred, you'll have a lot of hatred, or if you are maybe more inclined to greed or more inclined to having some like delusional things, so you'll start to notice most likely a pattern.
What's your pattern?
Yes. And so maybe the actionable takeaway is, what's your pattern? What shows up the most often for you? Is it greed or wanting? Is it hatred, aversion, not wanting? Or is it like not here, just not wanting to be here in this moment and checking out? However,
didn't you say there's a website where you can take the personality test for that?
I think so, or maybe it might just be like a PDF, but there is a quiz.
There's a quiz.
There's a quiz.
And we will put it
somewhere
on the website. We'll put it on the website for this episode. So if you want to take the quiz that we did not invent,
yes,
to kind of check that out, you can do that.
Yeah, and then
I also thought because of the way that I used this teaching that you gave me, I'm going to make a meditation.
Oh, fun!
I'm going to make a meditation about noticing the 3 flames and taking your pot of boiling water off the flames.
I love that.
So that'll be on the website also. And then I think the other thing is to, it's that, and you can use the stop skill that we talked about in a previous episode to slow down, to help you slow down, these are just another way, right? To be checking in with, what do I actually want? And to be fair, you can want to prove that you're right.
Yeah.
That can be what you want. But then you're going to okay, how am I going to be effective at proving that I'm right? Right? rather than just being like, I'm right.
The end.
The end.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I feel that. That's great. So go do those things. Go see how that works for you.
Wonderful.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.